It was an ordinary morning on Earth. People went about their daily lives, unaware of the cataclysmic event that was about to unfold. In cities across the globe, traffic flowed, children went to school, and workers filled offices. The world was peaceful, but the peace was soon shattered in the most unexpected way. At exactly 8 a.m., strange signals from outer space were detected by scientists in several countries. Initially, they thought it was a mistake, a miscommunication. But as the hours passed, the signals grew stronger and more distinct. They were not from any known satellite or celestial body. They were coming from somewhere far beyond the Milky Way. The signals were decoded, and the message was chilling: "We are coming. Prepare for invasion." News spread like wildfire. Governments scrambled to understand the message, and military leaders began making preparations. Some dismissed it as a hoax, others feared the worst. But no one could have anticipated what would happen next. In the sky, above every major city, a massive fleet of spacecraft appeared. They were enormous, hovering silently above the Earth's atmosphere. These ships were nothing like anything humans had ever seen before. Their sleek, metallic surfaces shimmered in the sunlight, and they seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly energy. Panic spread across the globe. People rushed to shelters, and governments declared states of emergency. News outlets broadcasted images of the ships, their size and power undeniable. It seemed like the end of the world. The world's military powers responded quickly. Fighter jets were scrambled, and missile launchers were aimed at the invaders. But nothing could reach them. The alien ships were far too advanced, their shields unbreakable. For every missile fired, there was an invisible barrier that deflected it without effort. Then, just when all seemed lost, something incredible happened. The Earth itself began to change. Gravity, the force that held everything together, started to fluctuate. It began as a subtle shift, barely noticeable to the average person. But as the hours passed, the effect became more pronounced. At first, it was a slight weightlessness, as if the force pulling people toward the ground had weakened. People floated for a brief moment before falling back to the ground. The gravity in some places became stronger, while in others, it seemed to vanish entirely. Scientists were baffled. There were no explanations for what was happening. Some theorized that the aliens' presence was somehow interfering with Earth's gravitational field. But no one could be certain. All they knew was that the situation was changing, and quickly. As the day progressed, the gravity shifts grew more intense. People began to panic as they found themselves floating uncontrollably or being pulled down with immense force. Cities were thrown into chaos. Buildings trembled as the ground beneath them seemed to shift. People were thrown into the air by sudden surges of gravity, while others struggled to stay grounded. In the midst of this chaos, a group of scientists and engineers came together in secret. They believed that the gravity changes were not a natural occurrence but a reaction to the alien ship's presence. They theorized that the aliens were attempting to manipulate Earth's gravity to create an advantage in their conquest. While the military worked to defend Earth from the alien invaders, this small group of scientists was working on a different solution. They focused on the gravity anomaly, hoping to understand its cause and harness it. What they didn't know was that this gravitational anomaly would become the key to humanity's survival. Back in the cities, the situation was worsening. People were finding it harder to walk, and transportation had come to a halt. The streets were filled with confusion, as pedestrians struggled to stay on the ground. Vehicles floated aimlessly, their engines powerless to keep them grounded. Helicopters and planes hovered unpredictably, unable to maintain control. In some regions, gravity became so weak that people had to hold on to objects just to stay connected to the Earth. In others, it became so strong that the ground seemed to pull people down with terrifying force. Buildings began to collapse in areas where the gravitational pull had intensified. As the hours stretched into the evening, the world watched as the aliens made their move. Their ships descended slowly, as though they were preparing for a grand invasion. The entire world was holding its breath, waiting for the aliens to make their next move. But something unexpected happened. The gravity began to stabilize, settling into a strange, unpredictable rhythm. For every force that tried to pull people into the sky, there was an equally strong force pulling them back to Earth. It was as if the planet itself had decided to fight back. The aliens, for the first time, seemed uncertain. Their ships, which had previously been untouchable, began to shake. It was clear that the gravity changes were affecting them, too. Their advanced technology, which had once been invulnerable, was now struggling to maintain control. The scientists, who had been working tirelessly to understand the cause of the gravity anomaly, finally made a breakthrough. They discovered that the changes in gravity were not random. They were a reaction to the alien ship's presence and their manipulation of Earth's natural forces. As the realization dawned on the human scientists, they knew they had to act quickly. The gravity anomaly was their only hope. If they could harness its power and turn it against the aliens, they might stand a chance at survival. But time was running out. The alien ships were preparing for a full-scale assault. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and humanity's only hope lay in understanding the strange force that was pulling them toward the sky, and pushing them back down. The world was no longer the place it had been just a few days ago. The invasion was not like anything people had imagined: no fiery explosions, no ground-shaking blasts, no armies of alien soldiers. Instead, it was a silent battle, a war fought between the unseen force of gravity and the alien invaders. As the day turned into night, the abnormal gravitational shifts continued to wreak havoc across Earth. People, once accustomed to the pull of the Earth, now found themselves in a constant struggle for balance. Some places experienced gravity so weak that people could barely stay grounded. Others saw gravity so strong that it was as if the Earth itself wanted to pull them into the core. Buildings collapsed in some areas where gravity intensified. Large skyscrapers, which had once been symbols of human achievement, now lay in ruins, their foundations crumbling under the overwhelming force. Streets were torn apart, and vehicles were either floating aimlessly or crumpled under the unbearable weight. The military tried to maintain order, but they had no way of dealing with the sudden, erratic changes in gravity. Fighter jets and helicopters were grounded. The skies were filled with chaos as the once reliable machines failed to navigate the shifting forces. On the ground, soldiers struggled to maintain control, as gravity pulled them in all directions. But in the midst of all this destruction, a new hope was born. A small group of scientists, led by a brilliant physicist, began to understand the strange connection between the alien ships and the gravitational anomaly. They worked around the clock, desperately trying to figure out how they could stop the aliens from controlling Earth's gravity. The physicist, who had spent his life studying the fundamental forces of the universe, theorized that the aliens had developed technology capable of manipulating gravity. The ships they used were not just vessels of war, they were giant machines built to alter the fabric of space and time itself. And it seemed that the aliens were using this technology to disrupt Earth's gravitational field, throwing the planet into chaos. What was even more troubling was that the aliens seemed to be able to control the shifts at will. Every time the human military tried to respond, the gravity would change again, making any form of counterattack impossible. The aliens had the upper hand, and humanity was struggling to keep up. But the scientist's breakthrough came when he realized something astonishing. The changes in gravity were not just an effect of the alien ships, they were a response to the ship's presence. As long as the aliens stayed in Earth's atmosphere, the gravity would continue to fluctuate unpredictably. He shared this discovery with the world's leaders, and the response was immediate. The military began to focus their efforts on finding a way to force the aliens to leave Earth's atmosphere. But the alien ships were too powerful, and the world's weapons were useless against them. Desperation set in as the human race realized that they might have no other option but to surrender. Yet, even in the face of impending defeat, there were those who refused to give up. Small resistance groups formed in the shadows, determined to fight back, even if the odds were stacked against them. One such group was led by a woman who had lost everything to the alien invasion. Her family had been caught in the collapsing buildings, and she had watched helplessly as they were swept away by the erratic forces of gravity. But instead of succumbing to despair, she vowed to make the aliens pay for the destruction they had caused. She gathered a group of survivors, including engineers, scientists, and military personnel, and began devising a plan. They knew that they couldn't fight the aliens directly, they had no weapons capable of damaging the advanced ships. But they had something the aliens didn't: knowledge of Earth and its natural forces. The woman and her team worked in secret, studying the gravity shifts. They discovered something that no one had expected: the gravitational changes, although dangerous, were not random. They had a pattern, a rhythm. And if they could predict the fluctuations, they might be able to use them to their advantage. It was a risky plan, but it was the only one they had. The group would need to manipulate the gravity changes to create a weapon, something that could target the alien ships without ever needing to leave the ground. It would require precise timing, great skill, and an understanding of the very forces that had thrown the world into chaos. Meanwhile, the rest of the world waited. Nations watched as the alien ships continued to hover above their cities, casting an ominous shadow over humanity. The aliens had not yet launched a full-scale invasion. They seemed content to watch, to observe, perhaps waiting for the right moment to strike. The human race was in a race against time. Every moment, the gravity fluctuated unpredictably, causing more destruction and loss of life. Every second counted. Humanity's survival depended on whether they could figure out how to fight back, how to turn the tables on the alien invaders. But there was one thing the aliens had underestimated: Earth itself. The planet had always had its own defenses, its own rhythms, and its own power. The aliens had come to conquer, but they had not realized that they were dealing with something much older, much stronger than they could comprehend. As the woman and her team worked tirelessly on their plan, the world held its breath. The fate of humanity was no longer in the hands of governments or military forces. It was in the hands of those who understood the forces of nature, those who knew how to fight back against the chaos that the aliens had unleashed. With every passing hour, the tension grew. The alien ships seemed to be waiting, their presence looming over the Earth like a dark cloud. The gravity shifts continued to wreak havoc, but now, a glimmer of hope shone through. Humanity was not ready to give up. The fight for Earth was far from over. The clock was ticking. Every second, the gravity shifted unpredictably, sending shockwaves through the world. Cities were now barely recognizable, with overturned cars, collapsed buildings, and people desperately trying to find some form of stability. But amidst all the chaos, a few daring individuals had not given up. They had found a way to fight back, and it was humanity's only hope. In a secret underground lab, the woman and her team of engineers, scientists, and military tacticians worked in a desperate frenzy. The plan they had devised was as bold as it was dangerous. They believed that if they could synchronize the gravity fluctuations, they could create a weapon capable of disrupting the alien ship's control over Earth's gravitational forces. The scientist leading the effort had spent years studying gravitational anomalies. He had a deep understanding of how gravitational fields interacted with both the environment and technology. Now, he was using that knowledge to devise a system that would harness Earth's natural gravitational fluctuations as a weapon against the aliens. The weapon wasn't a traditional one: there were no missiles, no laser beams, no nuclear bombs. Instead, it was a machine that would use the very force of gravity to target the alien ships. By amplifying and focusing the gravity surges, the machine could send powerful gravitational waves that would disrupt the alien ship's technology, destabilizing their ability to control the gravity shifts. The team worked tirelessly, fighting against time, knowing that every passing minute could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. They faced many challenges, from limited resources to the ever-present threat of the alien ships, but the team pressed on. Their unity and resolve were their greatest weapons. As they worked, the rest of the world's population continued to suffer. People struggled to adapt to the new reality of constantly shifting gravity. In some places, gravity was so weak that people could no longer walk properly. They floated aimlessly, unable to control their movements. In other places, gravity was so intense that even the strongest of men could barely stand, their bodies pressed to the ground with crushing force. Desperate for any solution, some groups of survivors took to the streets, trying to fight back against the alien forces. Makeshift weapons were crafted, but it quickly became apparent that nothing could penetrate the alien ship's shields. The invaders remained untouchable, watching silently as the human race descended into chaos. But as the human resistance struggled, the underground team continued their work, each member pouring their heart and soul into the project. They had to succeed. If they didn't, humanity would be left at the mercy of the alien conquerors. One evening, as the team tested their gravity manipulation device, something remarkable happened. The machine, which had been shaky and unreliable in its earlier tests, suddenly hummed to life. For the first time, the device seemed to stabilize. The gravity fluctuations it generated became more focused, more powerful. They had done it. They had created a weapon capable of affecting the alien ships. But there was one problem: the weapon was not yet perfected. The gravitational waves it emitted were still too unpredictable, and there was no way to guarantee it would work when the time came. They needed to refine the device, fine-tuning it until it could launch a precise strike against the alien ships. The woman leading the resistance had no time to waste. She understood that they were nearing the final moments. The alien ships had begun to move closer to the Earth's surface, and there were reports of strange energy bursts emanating from their hulls. The invaders were preparing to strike. With the stakes higher than ever, the team made the decision to launch the device, despite its imperfections. They knew that if they waited any longer, the aliens would succeed in their invasion. They had no choice. They loaded the gravity weapon onto a transport vehicle, preparing to take it to a high vantage point near the alien ships. The mission was risky. There was no guarantee that the weapon would even work, let alone cause any significant damage. But the team was determined to try. As they traveled through the ruins of the city, the streets were eerily silent. The world had become a ghost town, with only a few survivors left, hiding from the alien threat. The team passed by once bustling neighborhoods, now torn apart by the gravitational chaos. The weapon was their only hope. Finally, they reached their destination, a high tower that overlooked the alien ships, still hovering above the Earth. From here, they could launch the weapon directly into the gravitational field of the invaders, hoping that it would be powerful enough to destabilize their control. The woman stood at the base of the tower, looking up at the alien ships. For a moment, she thought about all the lives that had been lost in the chaos. She thought about her family, who had been taken by the gravity shifts, and the countless others who had perished. This was for them. This was for humanity. As the team prepared to activate the weapon, a sudden surge of gravity hit them. The world shifted again, the ground beneath their feet quaking with force. The alien ships, which had remained stationary, now began to move. It was as though they had sensed what was coming. Without warning, the woman shouted to the team, "Activate it now." The gravity weapon powered up, sending out a wave of concentrated gravitational force. The machine hummed, and for a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the wave surged forward, rippling through the air. The alien ships trembled as the gravity around them shifted violently. The sky seemed to bend as the force of the gravity weapon collided with the alien ships' shields. The ships shuddered, their energy fields flickering as if struggling to hold against the powerful force. For the first time, the aliens seemed vulnerable. The once untouchable invaders were losing their grip on the gravity they had manipulated so easily. But the battle was far from over. The gravity wave had caused a temporary disruption, but it had not been enough to destroy the alien ships. They were beginning to recover, their shields strengthening again. The woman and her team knew they had only a brief moment before the aliens retaliated. The next phase of their plan had already been set in motion. It was now or never. The gravity weapon had struck, but the alien ships were far from defeated. For a brief moment, the skies had seemed to flicker with hope as the ships shook violently, their shields unable to fully block the intense gravitational waves. However, as the pulses died down, the ships began to regain control, their energy fields reactivating with an almost eerie precision. It was clear that the invaders were resilient, but humanity had taken the first step in disrupting their seemingly perfect invasion plan. The woman who led the resistance felt her heart race. The weapon had worked, but it wasn't enough. They needed to increase the intensity of the gravity surges. The aliens were powerful, but now they were vulnerable, and that vulnerability had to be exploited. It was time to take risks. As the team quickly retreated from their observation point, they saw the alien ships moving into position. It was as if the invaders had already understood the gravity fluctuations weren't just random. They could see the ships aligning in formation, almost as though preparing for a counterattack. "What are they doing?" someone from the team asked, voice trembling. "They're adjusting," the physicist leading the project responded, his tone grim. "They're trying to counteract the gravity shifts." They might have been aware of the anomaly all along, but they hadn't expected humans to start using it against them. The woman's mind raced. If the aliens were attempting to adjust their gravity manipulation systems, they might be able to predict the next fluctuations. She knew that the resistance's only chance lay in keeping the aliens off balance, using the unpredictability of gravity itself as a weapon. "We need to act now," she said, determination flooding her voice. "Our next move needs to be even more intense. We've seen their ships falter under our gravity pulses, but we have to push harder. We have to find their weak points." The team quickly regrouped and began analyzing the results of their previous test. The gravity waves had disrupted the alien shields, but only for a short time. It wasn't enough to inflict lasting damage, but it was clear the technology the aliens used to control gravity was highly sensitive. They were not invincible, just highly advanced, which meant they could be beaten. The woman's thoughts drifted back to everything they had sacrificed to get to this point, the countless lives lost to the chaotic gravity shifts, the destruction of entire cities, and the pain of watching the world change in ways no one could have anticipated. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was finding the key to turning the tide. "I think we've found it," the scientist said suddenly, his voice filled with a mix of excitement and fear. "If we amplify the pulse, just once more, we can create a gravitational well. It'll be like a trap, pulling the alien ships into one concentrated point. It'll destabilize their entire fleet." The woman's eyes widened. It was a risky move. They'd never tested anything like it before. The gravitational well would be intense, far beyond what they had already experienced. If it worked, it could cripple the alien fleet. But if it didn't, there was no telling how the aliens might retaliate. "We don't have time to test it," she said firmly. "Prepare the device. This is our chance." The team hurriedly made their way back to the control station, their hearts pounding in their chests. Each of them knew the risks, but they also knew this was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment when humanity would fight back. Outside, the alien ships began to descend. Their descent was slow, almost deliberate. The soundless ships moved closer to the planet's surface, preparing for a full-scale assault. On the ground, panic gripped the remaining survivors. There were few places left to hide, and many were left with only one option: to fight. The woman stood before the machine, watching the alien ships through the large windows. The weight of her decision hung heavy in the air. The gravitational well would be the ultimate test of their technology, but it could also backfire in ways they couldn't predict. She took a deep breath and gave the order. Activate the gravity pulse. Now. The machine whirred to life, humming with power. The air around the device seemed to distort as the gravitational energy built, swirling in a chaotic vortex. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a low rumble filled the air. This time, there was no hesitation. The pulse surged out of the machine with a force greater than any of them had anticipated. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The gravitational wave shot into the sky, stretching outward like an invisible fist. The alien ships, which had been descending in a controlled formation, suddenly faltered. The gravitational well had begun to form, pulling the ships in toward one central point, creating a vortex that threatened to suck them all into the very fabric of the Earth itself. The alien ships struggled, their energy shields flickering as they tried to adjust to the powerful force pulling them inward. The humans watched in tense silence, waiting to see if their plan would work. And then, something unexpected happened. The aliens seemed to adapt faster than the scientists had predicted. Their ships began to shift, their hulls glowing as they powered up. A strange hum filled the air as the alien ships activated a counterforce, and for a moment, it seemed as though they were escaping the gravitational pull. But just as the ships began to stabilize, the ground beneath them cracked open. The gravitational pulse had destabilized the very Earth, creating rifts that tore through the landscape. Buildings collapsed, and large fissures opened wide, sending shockwaves through the area. "It's not enough," the scientist yelled. "We need more power." The woman, her heart racing, grabbed the control panel and adjusted the settings. "We can't wait. Increase the intensity. We push now, together." With all their might, they cranked the machine to its maximum setting. The gravitational well expanded rapidly, the pulse intensifying into a blinding wave of force. This time, it was too much for the alien ships. The shields flickered violently, struggling against the overwhelming pull of Earth's gravity. The ships, unable to compensate for the intensified force, began to shift erratically, their structures groaning under the pressure. And then, with a deafening crack, one of the alien ships tore apart, its shield unable to hold any longer. It disintegrated in a burst of energy, its pieces scattering across the sky. The remaining ships, seeing their ally destroyed, faltered in their movements, their advanced technology no match for the gravity that humanity had learned to harness. The woman watched in stunned silence as the once unstoppable fleet of alien ships began to break apart, one by one. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a glimmer of hope. Humanity had found a way to fight back. But the battle was far from over. The aliens were not easily defeated, and this was only the beginning. The air was thick with tension as the remnants of the alien fleet began to disintegrate before their eyes. The destruction of the first ship sent a wave of disbelief through the resistance team. What had once seemed impossible, defeating the invaders by manipulating gravity, was now happening in real time. But as the woman and her team watched, their victory was tempered by an overwhelming sense of urgency. The remaining alien ships were now retreating, regrouping, and clearly adapting to the force they had encountered. The destruction of the first ship had caused massive shockwaves, but the enemy was far from finished. In fact, their retreat felt more like a strategic retreat, a way to reorganize for a second strike. "We've only just started," the woman muttered, barely able to contain the dread gnawing at her stomach. "They won't give up that easily." Despite their success, the resistance team knew that the aliens were regrouping, and their technology was too advanced for one successful strike to end the war. The machines may have cracked under the gravitational pressure, but the alien ships still had enough power to fight back. The battle was far from won. The scientist who had helped lead the development of the gravity weapon quickly began adjusting the machine. "We need to keep the pressure on them. If we can amplify this gravitational well again, we might be able to finish them off. But we don't have much time, one of the engineers pointed out. We've already pushed the device to its limit. If we go beyond this point, we risk destabilizing everything, even the Earth itself. The woman's mind raced. The risk of further destabilization was real. The power of gravity was unpredictable, and even the slightest miscalculation could tear the planet apart. The thought of risking everything to finish the job weighed heavily on her, but there was no choice. If they didn't act now, the aliens would soon regain their full strength and humanity's last hope would be lost. "Do it," she commanded, her voice steady despite the mounting fear. "We don't have another option." The engineer and scientist moved quickly, making the necessary adjustments to the gravity device. The hum of the machine grew louder, vibrating the ground beneath their feet. The atmosphere felt thick with anticipation, as if the Earth itself were holding its breath. Outside, the alien ships were repositioning. They had retreated, but they weren't giving up. The woman could see their massive shapes lingering in the sky, just beyond the range of her sight. But it was clear, they were preparing for something far worse than what had come before. A final assault. As the machine powered up, the woman's team braced themselves for what was to come. She could feel the gravitational forces shifting all around them, the Earth trembling beneath their feet. The gravity pulses had already caused so much destruction. The cities were nothing but ruins now, and the sky was streaked with alien fire as the invaders launched small, retaliatory blasts toward the ground. Despite the chaos, there was something oddly comforting in knowing that they had struck a blow. For the first time, it felt like humanity might stand a chance. They weren't helpless anymore. They weren't just waiting for the end. The scientist, sweat trickling down his face, slammed a button. The machine surged to life, its power building to a fever pitch. A deep rumble reverberated through the ground, and the gravitational well expanded once more, bigger, stronger, and more focused than ever before. This time, the wave was unleashed with such force that it was visible to the naked eye. The fabric of space seemed to warp, a shimmering distortion in the air as the massive pull of gravity distorted the world around them. The ground cracked open in new places, fissures extending far and wide, but the team didn't flinch. They had no choice but to trust the machine's power now. The pulse shot up toward the alien ships with the fury of a world on the edge. The ships, now in a desperate attempt to maintain their position, tried to counteract the waves with their own technology. They fired off bursts of energy, trying to form a protective shield, but it was too late. The wave reached them before they could adjust. The effect was immediate. The alien ships, once so confident in their invulnerability, now jerked and twisted in the air, their shields flickering and sparking. For a moment, it seemed as though they might tear apart, just like the first ship had. But this time, the aliens weren't just retreating. They were trying to fight back, resisting the pull with everything they had. But the gravitational force was too strong. It wasn't just pulling them into the ground, it was shaking their entire systems. The ships couldn't hold. One by one, the ships began to break apart, their hulls cracking and disintegrating under the immense pressure. The sky seemed to split open as energy fields flickered and exploded. The ground trembled with such force that it seemed like the planet itself might split in two. But in the midst of the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope. The alien ships were falling. The woman and her team stood at the control station, watching as the once mighty fleet was destroyed, piece by piece. One ship, then another, broke apart in a shower of sparks and flames, falling from the sky like broken stars. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air. It was as if the world itself had exhaled. The gravitational pulse had succeeded. The alien invaders were retreating, their fleet broken and scattered. Humanity had won the first battle. But victory came with a price. The woman looked out at the ruined city, the destruction that had already claimed so many lives. Her heart ached for the people who had lost everything. The battle was over, but the war had left scars that would last for generations. There was no time for celebration. The team quickly began to assess the damage. The gravitational well had caused tremendous destruction, and the Earth's crust was beginning to show signs of further instability. If they didn't stabilize the situation soon, the consequences could be catastrophic. The woman turned to her team. "We've won this fight, but we're not done yet. We need to find a way to stabilize Earth's gravity before it's too late." There was no time to lose. The Resistance had dealt a devastating blow to the alien fleet, but now they faced a new challenge: repairing the damage they had caused in their fight for survival. It was time to rebuild. The victory had been hard-earned, but it was clear that the fight was not yet over. As the remnants of the alien fleet scattered across the sky, and the gravitational pulse that had disrupted their control over Earth's gravity began to dissipate, the woman and her team had a fleeting moment of relief. But it was only a moment. The Earth trembled beneath them, and the destruction caused by the gravity surges had left deep scars in the planet's surface. "We've won the battle, but the war is far from over," the woman said, her voice firm but filled with exhaustion. The weight of the responsibility that had been thrust upon her seemed heavier than ever. The Earth's gravitational shifts, though still unpredictable, were beginning to stabilize. The planet was slowly returning to some semblance of normality. But it was clear that the damage caused by the alien interference and their gravitational manipulation would not be easily repaired. The team gathered in the underground facility, their faces pale from exhaustion, but their eyes still burning with determination. The gravity weapon had worked, against all odds, but it had come at a cost. The machine that had caused such powerful waves was a marvel of science, but it was also the reason for so much destruction. They had to fix the damage they had caused, or humanity might face even greater peril. "We need to stabilize the gravitational fields," the scientist who had helped build the weapon said, rubbing his temples. "If we don't, the planet will keep shaking. More fissures will open, cities will collapse, and the Earth's crust will eventually fail. We've only delayed the inevitable." The woman nodded grimly. She knew he was right. The gravitational device had been their lifeline, but now it was a ticking time bomb. They had to find a way to stabilize the Earth before it fell into chaos again. They worked tirelessly, using all the data they had gathered from the gravity pulses to recalibrate the device and reverse the damage. The team knew that Earth's survival depended on it. They had to restore balance, but they also knew that they couldn't rely on the gravity weapon forever. They needed a permanent solution. Days turned into weeks as they worked around the clock. The world outside was beginning to rebuild. Survivors who had once thought all hope was lost were now coming together to reclaim their cities. New leadership was emerging, and people were starting to think about rebuilding not just their homes, but their way of life. But the task ahead was daunting. The woman often walked through the ruined streets of the cities, seeing the devastation that had once been bustling metropolises. She watched as the survivors pulled together, their resilience shining through in the face of catastrophe. The strength of humanity was something the aliens hadn't anticipated. They had come to conquer, to enslave, but they had underestimated humanity's will to fight and rebuild. As the woman walked through the streets, she came across a group of children playing in a park that had been turned to rubble. They were laughing, despite the broken buildings surrounding them, playing a game with what little they had. The sight of their joy amidst so much destruction made her pause for a moment. "That's the spirit we need," she thought, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "That's what we're fighting for." The team had found a way to stabilize the gravity, but it wasn't perfect. It was a temporary fix, enough to hold things together for now, but not enough to ensure Earth's long-term survival. They needed to find a more permanent solution, one that could restore natural balance to the planet and prevent the aliens from ever attempting another invasion. The woman returned to the underground facility, where the rest of her team had made significant progress. The gravity machine, though still a powerful tool, was now modified to slowly recalibrate the planet's gravitational fields. It would take time, but they had managed to stabilize the Earth for now. The scientist in charge of the project looked up as she entered the room. "We've done it," he said, his voice filled with exhaustion but also relief. "We've managed to keep the gravity waves stable. Earth's core is beginning to adapt to the changes. The worst of it is over." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. They had done what seemed impossible. The Earth would survive, but only because of the sacrifices of the team, the resistance, and the countless others who had fought to protect it. But the war with the aliens wasn't over. The woman knew that the aliens would not give up. They would regroup, reassess, and try again. But this time, humanity would be ready. The final pulse of the gravity weapon had created a rift in the alien fleet, but it had also created an opening for a counterattack. The alien commanders would be strategizing, learning from their mistakes. But this time, humanity had gained something invaluable: knowledge of their enemies' weaknesses, and the resilience to fight back when all seemed lost. The woman turned to the team. "This isn't the end. We've bought ourselves time, but we need to keep pushing forward. The aliens won't stop. And we can't either." They all nodded in agreement, knowing the battle was far from over. The road ahead would be long, and it would require more than just weapons and technology. It would require unity, innovation, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the survival of the human race. Outside, the skies began to clear. The once unpredictable shifts in gravity seemed to calm, and the planet breathed a sigh of relief. Humanity had faced its greatest threat, and though the scars of the battle would remain for generations, they had survived. And as the woman gazed at the horizon, she realized something profound. Earth had faced an impossible challenge, but it had also discovered a powerful truth. Together, humanity was unstoppable.